what does it mean when we don't have a lens to theology that reflects who we are as Africans in America? Is this making sense? I've taught you guys this, so you kind of know where I'm going with this. Again, I told you he's the pastor of the Abyssinian Baptist Church. They call it the blackest church in Shelby County. They call this church the blackest church in Shelby County because they really uphold our African tradition, and he does a wonderful job. And he will start by talking about the main points of the politics of Jesus with some questions. And if you have questions, please formulate them, because what I want to do is be able to kind of stop him sometimes and let you ask your questions so that you're part of it as well. Part of the sport as well. Are we good?
Yeah, you can turn it to him. You can turn it to him. It's on, you can,
Can you put us on gallery where we can both be seen at the same time?
Can you hold this? Can you hold the camera? I got that. Thank you.
All right. We're still not on gallery because I'm talking, it's on me. Now I can see him. Can I say something, Earl?
okay, hold on.
What do you have to do?
Connect this sound to the house.
All right. You're not connected, bro, so I'm going to keep talking for a minute. But as he comes on and we get this, first of all, do me a favor, put your hands together for our media people that is making this work, even though all of our power is out and they are trying to, you see they running cords from the balcony and all of that stuff. So we thank God for them. It's going to make it work. And if you will, give me a few extra minutes toward the end of Bible study. So hold on.
Try to talk.
Testing.
Ask him, can he hear you?
Can you hear me, Earl? I don't think you can hear me.
He said he can no longer. Okay.
He can't hear me. That's you, Earl? Can you hear me? We can hear him.
I'm muted on him. I'm muted.
I don't know if you by chance are asking me if I can hear you, because I can't. I can see you, and I was reading your lips, so I figured you might have been asking me. So I could hear earlier, but I can't hear now. So this is where you just text me all this stuff, and then I just respond to your text box. Well, while you're getting that together, since your people can hear me, I want to say thank you for the opportunity to share with the historic Mount Olive Baptist Church. And I, being the pastor of Abyssinian Baptist Church in Memphis, I can relate to the challenges of technology. It's always good when it works, and it's always not so good when it doesn't. And so I don't feel any ways about us having to manage these technological challenges at the moment, other than it gave Dr. Gibson a little bit too long to tell all of my business about how we met and all of that. And that's just a hilarious and honest and humbling story that we share and have shared over the years. So again, thanks. And okay, Gino, I will start. I got some text. I'll start with question one. Let me finish my preliminaries, big home. Okay. I know everybody's question time, but again, thanks. It is with deep gratitude that I share a conversation and dialogue with y'all about these wonderful matters. And I always have to give, some kudos and credit to Dr. Gibson for his elder brothership over the last, 20 years now. Over the last 20 years, we met in 2003. And as such, I always want to say yes, because I just wish that I was there in person and really could wow. So let me respond and remark on what he briefly that you all have been discussing relative to this workable or working gospel that I think is extremely valuable to Black faith communities. And I'll say a little bit more about the phrase, white evangelical theology and Black faith in just a minute. But when I hear the term workable and working gospel, it makes me think about what we would call in the academy, but what we live out every day in communities of Black safe space and Black faith, practical theology. One of the ways to understand practical theology is through the scriptural reference when they say you shouldn't be so heavily minded that you won't find any earthly good. And so when we think about theology, when we think about Black theology, when we think about theology of people of African descent, especially in the Americas, we think about their every day, sometimes just to maintain a semblance of sanity. And I'll come back to sanity in just a second. So for me, I've talked about this in my book, this is some of the foundational approaches that I have to faith, religion, spirituality, is that all theology is experiential, contextual, and rhetorical. I'll explain what I mean by that, and I hope that it makes sense. Gino, what you have to do, Doc, is if your people are asking questions, you're going to have to translate the questions to me via text. Because I know you said that they can ask them at any time, I definitely welcome them. But I'm going to try to move through this, and I'll just wait until you send a text or something like that to NTJ. So when I say all theology is experiential, I mean it's grounded in the human experience, the lived experience of human beings. That without human beings living and existing, we do not have any theology. Our God talk, our understanding of who God is, and how God is grounded in, first and foremost, human experience. So that experience, and here's where I believe the strongest pivot point in our understanding of God. And these are things that we articulate in songs and worship. These are things that we articulate and express in sermonic presentation. These are things we articulate and express within the pages of the sacred text and the scripture. All of our experience takes place in a cultural context, in a chronological context. To live in 2023 is not the same as living in 1823 or 1623 or 70 AD. It is a social context. To live in one society is not necessarily the same as living in another society. So to live in the social conditions of an affluent community is not the same as living in the social conditions of an impoverished community. It is cultural, it's chronological, it's social, it's political. Our existence is political. So to live in a quote-unquote democratic country is not the same as living in a quote-unquote dictatorial country or a totalitarian country or a communist country, or to live in the yet-to-be United States of America. Y'all pastor preach for all the time, I'll be listening to this sermon. Is not the same as living in the monarchy of Great Britain. So all theology is experiential, but that experience takes place in a social context, in a political context, in a chronological context, in a cultural context, and in a geographical context. So to live in the Northeast, or the Midwest, as we might call it, or the West, is not the same as living in the Deep South, even though I believe Malcolm X is right, and I'll come to Malcolm in a second, because Dr. Gibson asked me to reference some of this. Malcolm said everything south of Canada is Deep South, whereas I say everything south of Canada is Mississippi. Because some of the social and political realities are the same all throughout the country from sea to shining sea. So all theology is experiential, all theology is contextual, and all theology is rhetorical, because we try to find ways to communicate it and articulate it. We try to find ways to communicate it and articulate it verbally. We try to find ways to communicate it and articulate it musically or artistically. We find a way to do it in literature. So the scriptures are rhetorical presentations of people's lived experience in their context, in social context, in cultural context, in political context. So, if we're talking about a workable gospel, a working gospel, that's practical theology, and all theology is experiential, contextual, and rhetorical, we have to figure out whose rhetoric, whose language, whose communication materials are we leaning into? Whose rhetoric are we seeking to practice or embody? Here's where we get to what many people believe to be a rift between white evangelical theology and what for us, I believe, and others believe, ought to be black liberationist theology. If we aren't careful, we will try to live out the experiences of white, European, Anglo-Saxon individuals whose social context, whose political context, whose cultural context, for sure, is different than ours. This is why it's dangerous to say things like, God took my black soul, dipped it in red blood. Some of y'all can finish this statement. Gino, tell me if they finish this statement. And washed me white as snow. That standardizes certain things insofar as how we psychologically and religiously or spiritually see blackness and whiteness. Now, if I had time, which I don't, I would walk us through the chronological development of our faith and how it goes from being at its origin an African-centered religious tradition, African traditional religion, yes, Christianity, the religion of Jesus of Nazareth, the one who Matt King Carter called the Negro from Nazareth, the one Kelly Brown Douglas called the Black Christ, the one I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute, Albert Clay Dream calls the Black Messiah, the one who I call the gangster from Galilee. His faith tradition, his religious practice is grounded in the social, the political, the cultural, and the chronological context of Northeast Africa about 2,000 years ago. This would be technically before the invention of what we would call whiteness or, the Anglo-Saxon or, all this. And it's not to say that there were not different ethnic groups at the origins of Christianity. There were, but they just were not constituted or constructed the way that we have come to understand race is today. The idea of race does not come into our social and political and cultural context until about the 1600s. Some might say the 1400s, 1500s, but most of us are going to say somewhere around the 1600s. So, if indeed at the origins the faith tradition is Afrocentric or African-centered, if Christianity at its origins is an African traditional religion, you don't have to take my word for it. Here's a book I pulled up. This is called The Roots of Nubian Christianity Uncovered. There are others. I just got some back in my office. How Africa Shaped the Christian Mind. There's a bunch of them. I'll give them to Dr. Gibson and Edith Shedden, which y'all are interested in serving through this a little bit more. But I will talk about how Christianity goes from being a revolutionary religious practice of black Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth, against a white Roman Empire. Now relax, I know I said race did not exist until the 1600s, and then here I am saying Jesus is a revolutionary religious leader revolting against a white Roman Empire. Well, Rome is in Italy. Italy is in Europe. Europeans are generally, I hope y'all say white when I pause like that, because if I pause like that, I'm supposed to fill in the blank, because that's how we do. So I just studied that was it. So it transitions at some point where the standard is African, the standard is black. Somebody might say, well, what do you mean by black? Well, there's a couple of things that people tend to mean by black. I think it weaves into a lot of what we're trying to discuss from the experiential, the contextual, and the rhetorical. So black is, according to James Cone and others, ontological. Blackness is a state of being whereby you are outcast or marginalized, or as Cornell West would say, you see the world from the underside. That's part of blackness. And so, in that regard, Christianity was an outcast religion. This is what the cross was. This is what Jesus is executed. And so, as such, you have a blackness that is ontological. And then several people from several different ethnic groups can identify with ontological blackness. So Cone would say that Jesus was ontologically black. But Clegg, myself, and others say not only was he ontologically black, he is existentially black. The man has black skin. Y'all know the scriptures. Hair like, I'm pausing so y'all can say lambs. Skin like, I'm pausing so y'all can say bronze that have been burned. So bronze is already brown and it's burned. Okay, so there are at its origins some revolutionary African-centered black experiences embedded within the origins of Christianity. How do we get to white evangelical theology? Well, it's because at some point Rome becomes the center of the Christian faith. And now Catholic means universal, and the universal church is found in Rome. I don't have time to go into Constantinian Christianity and how the Emperor Constantine transforms this radical revolutionary religion, basically the imperial religion of Rome. But that's what many of our elders and ancestors encountered on the shores of North America. It was a very white-centered, imperialistic, hegemonic, which is to say, of the dominant culture, religion. And so now what you have from black churches and black preachers and black adherents of the religion are the rhetorical articulations or the words, the languages, the symbols of white evangelical theology. This is how you end up with a white Jesus on a mural or in stained glass at a black church. So if there was right now for us a fundamental, concrete difference in white evangelical theology and black liberation theology, and I think Dr. Hendricks starts to get into this with the politics of Jesus, where he is really setting the social, the political, the cultural, he's exegeting or interrogating and interpreting how what Jesus is recorded as saying and doing in the Gospels can be most adequately understood through the social, the political, the cultural, the chronological context that he lives in. So Dr. Hendricks is doing this distinction that I'm about to make in the politics of Jesus, but I don't know, Dr. G, if y'all have also picked up his latest to consider this. And if I got some questions, please send them to me, into individual salvation. So it decentralizes the notion of all of us as a family or community of faith. And that God's salvation project, if you will, is not simply about your individual soul being saved. It is about the full emancipation, the full empowerment, and the full liberation of the community. So when you talk about Africana ways of knowing, or ancient African ways of knowing, stuff like Ubuntu, which I think I heard Dr. Gibson show y'all before, the idea that I am because you are, or I am because we are, this notion of a communal existence is one that is central to Africana ways of knowing religion.
Can you hear me now?
Can you say something else, you want?
Can you hear me?
I heard something, but it kind of was muffled. So let me just press on a little bit more. But I think God is working something out already. That exchange in just a second. But when you start talking about the white evangelical theology, it really centralizes on a lot of the themes of Paul in the New Testament, where Paul is starting to describe this personal relationship with God. and it is interpreted generally as this individual salvation. So the sacrificial atonement of Jesus, the substitutionary atonement of Jesus, is seen as the foundation of the faith. And so now it's no longer about how Jesus behaved and acted that got Jesus executed by the Roman Empire. It's about how we as individuals can be in righteous and right standing with God individually, so that our individual sin can be covered by the blood of Jesus, and then we individually give account to God on the day of judgment. And God says to us individually, well done, thy good and faithful servant. Well, according to Dr. Hendricks, Jesus' project, his religious project, his theological project, his spiritual project, is about much more than somebody's individual salvation. It's about communal liberation. I think the more we see and understand that as Jesus' foundational practice, Jesus' practical theology, the more I think we can reclaim the origins of the faith and won't suffer from the insanity of trying to emulate and live into a practical theology that decenters or disregards black folks' lived experience. Because, as one scholar once said, the God that people are praying to on the top of the slave ship is not the same God that people are praying to on the bottom of the slave ship. The people on the top of the slave ship are praying for the maintenance of inequitable power.
Wow.
They have an amount of power that is not equitable by God's standards. They have it, they're praying to God, to their God, to maintain it. The people at the bottom of the station are not praying for the maintenance of inequitable power. They are praying for the liberation of the oppressed and an equitable distribution of God's power. So it grieves me sometimes, and I'm going to give y'all some of my confession. Yes, Gino, yes, Dr. Gibson. Spiritually only is dangerous, and it's misleading, because we tend to think of a distinct separation between the spiritual world and the physical world. And that comes from what is called Platonic, root word Plato, dualism. Guess what? Plato is a Greco-Roman guy. So Plato's philosophy is not African-centered. It's not communal. They start to compartmentalize. They start to distinguish between these different realms of existence. African folks don't do this, which is why we feel like we can talk to our elders and our ancestors, whether they're in this realm or the afterlife. And y'all know we do it, whether you know you're doing it directly or not. Man, I heard my mama talking about your mother or your elder, your ancestor, your elder or your loved one has been in the bosom of Abraham, in the afterlife for years, for decades. And you still hear their voice, you still see their images. And we feel like we can feel them, sense them. That's an African way of knowing it. And if you think it is distinct from the origins of Christianity, then that means you need to revisit the Mount of Transfiguration.
Wow.
When Jesus, James, John, and Peter go up onto a mountain. And according to Matthew, bright light shines. Jesus' clothes become like dazzling white. His face shines like light. And all of a sudden, some other folks show up. Elijah shows up. Moses shows up. I think Abraham shows up. Now, I don't know if y'all know this, but Elijah, Abraham, and Moses been going a long time. So, what Africana or African interpretive hermeneutics would provide us, if we were looking at this in a way that's true to our lived experience, we would say, oh, this is what our elders and ancestors in Africa call ancestral veneration. And now you wouldn't be so quick to dismiss African traditional religion because you see it rhetorically embedded in our scriptures. It's there. It's in your Bible. You should pull it out. I mean, that's it. If you got a Bible app, you can tear it out. So, again, the communal liberation which is a more African-centered way of knowing and understanding God, versus an individual salvation or a personal piety, which is a more Eurocentric way of understanding who and how God is. So I think, Dr. Gibson, to your question, blackness is demonized because white is standardized. Blackness is demonized because whiteness is standardized. So if you don't view all things interconnected as we do in ancient African cosmology, if you cannot view all things as sacred, and this is in the scriptures too, in God we live, and move, and have our being. If creation takes place, ex nihilo, everything that was created, well, it's sacred. I hope y'all listening. I hope this is making sense. So the demonization of blackness comes from the standardization of whiteness. And the standardization of whiteness is a byproduct of white imperialism. So if the European armies are conquering us in Africa, if the European militaries are indeed, how would we put this, colonizing these parts of Africa, then they get to standardize their social, their political, their cultural, and their existential mores and values. So as long as they do that, then we collectively are put in a defensive position where we have to respond to that. So now this is where you see so many people trying to defend in blackness as, valuable, and trying to reclaim blackness as sacred and holy, because blackness is demonized because whiteness is standardized. And no, I don't believe that Jesus loses Jesus' divinity and spirituality by being Jesus is for we would call in our faith traditions the kingdom of God. So this is God's will being done on earth. Believe that there's racism or sexism in heaven, or homophobia or xenophobia in heaven. We don't think that there is economic injustice and inequity in heaven. We don't think there's the same revolutionary work that Jesus was doing, trying to make God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I would argue, if you are engaged in revolutionary work, in this social, political, and cultural context, this would be if you are not working towards the liberation of black people. Our Clegg says, nothing is more sacred to God than the liberation of black people. So if you are engaged in that revolutionary work, I would argue this would probably make you more divine and more spiritual than somebody who is simply quoting perfunctory scriptures out of context, trying to make it seem like they are deep and they love God. But how can you love God who you have never seen? But you can't love your neighbor who you see every day. Or you think your neighbors are only those who meet your social, political, economic, cultural, and evangelical standards. If I was at Abyssinia, Abyssinia. The devil is a liar.
Can I do it now?
So, I
Can
can't see. Jesus said.
We have a big echo here, so I can't talk long. But
Well, we have a big echo here, so I can't talk long. But
can you transition?
can you transition
to showing us how Albert Clegg was
to
Christian,
showing us how Albert Clegg
was Christian and woke at the same time, and how you came into that work?
Some of that work was so I want you to type it, but I did hear you ask me about how Albert Clegg was Christian and some.
or at the same time, and how you came into that work.
Gotcha. And let me say something about this idea of wokeness, because the concept itself has been rather compromised. And I think there's an aspect of the idea of wokeness which simply means, to be woke means to be enlightened. So think about the Gospel of John and the dichotomy or the contention between light and darkness. His light shined in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. That's one way of saying Jesus was woke. Of course he was woke because in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. Only way to know the truth and the way the truth of life is to be enlightened. And so I think that wing evangelicals who are concerned about the type of light that'll start to be shined or shown in the general public. Because if there is too much truth, then the lies of an unjust and inequitable empire if you are not full of grace and truth, like Jesus. So for Albert Clegg, let me go back to, let me tell y'all who Albert Clegg was. First, Albert Clegg is the founder of what we know today as the Pan-African Orthodox Christian Church. This is a denomination that springs forth as a byproduct of his planting several churches that have come to be known as the Shrine of the Black Madonna. So the Black Madonna is a reference to Jesus' mother Mary. So the Black Madonna gives birth to the Black Messiah. And in Albert Clegg, Jesus is not just ontologically black. Jesus is existentially black. He got black skin. He grows up in a black community. Can any good thing come out of Nazareth? He was born to a black single parent mama who got pregnant before she got married. And folks weren't necessarily sure about who the daddy was, okay? So for Clegg and these shrines, they start out with shrine number 1, which is in Detroit, Michigan, starts out as Central United Church of Christ. Central United Church of Christ. And he transforms Central United Church of Christ into the Shrine of the Black Madonna, which is called that in part because he unveils a mural, Resurrection Sunday in 1967, of the Black Madonna and Child. And some of y'all, when y'all get a chance, you can just Google Black Madonna and Child, and you will see that image of the Black Mother, Mary, holding the black baby, Jesus. And so for him, it's two things. It is the need to psychologically reclaim for black folks the value of and the divinity of and the holiness of blackness. But it is also to be true to the history, because whiteness had been and continues to be standardized, blackness has been and continues to be demonized. Well, Clegg is trying to reclaim the theological imagination. Because if black folks are trying to conjure up an understanding of who and how God is, and you can only draw from white evangelical rhetorical tools, then it's going to distort our theological imagination. And so we will forever see ourselves as ungodly because, whether we know it or not, for too many of us, maybe not in our mouth, but too many black Christians, God is white. And if you don't believe me, Google God when you get a chance and click the images and watch all of the images that come up. Watch how white they are. Education project in the history. And the hope is that our people will live more like Jesus lived. I think it's Peter Gomes in his book, The Scandalous Gospel of Jesus Christ, who says a whole lot of people talk about they preaching what Jesus preached. No, they talk about they preaching Jesus, but they not preaching what Jesus preached. This takes me back to the notion of the working gospel, the workable gospel, and what Jesus was preaching. Not just this notion of the life, the death, the burial, and the resurrection. That's not what Jesus preached. That's preaching about Jesus, but that's not what Jesus preached. And so Clegg is trying to motivate us to preach what Jesus preached and to live like Jesus lived. And one of the wonderful moves I think Clegg makes is he starts to include people who we would call today as woke activists in the community of faith in ways that they had been ostracized from or demonized by in times past. So Stokely Carmichael, for instance, Clegg has a sermon in his book, The Black Messiah, that is called An Epistle to Stokely, where he's trying to challenge black revolutionaries like Stokely Carmichael, how they saw black revolutionaries then, and how they felt like a relationship with black revolutionaries would enhance both the black church and the black revolution to make God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And the way we see the same struggle and tension being played out today. So for Clegg, Christianity was not simply about what kind of creeds you could recite. It was not about how much you came to church on Sunday. It was not about how much you gave in offering plate. All of that stuff was cool and valuable as part of a program to build and sustain the black institution that we call the black church. But the black institution that we call the black church, as far as Clegg is concerned, as far as I'm concerned, is the training ground for us to go into the public square and enact God's will to be done on earth as it is in heaven. So, one of the people who Clegg argues embodies and lives out Christianity is Malcolm X. Don't log on. Don't get me out the Zoom.
Yes, sir.
Let's come together, children. There's a great camp meeting. Okay? So what Clegg says about Malcolm X in concert with Dr. King is one thing that you could not deny is that they undoubtedly and irrevocably loved black people, and that they were willing to be a witness in public to their love of black people. So Clegg would say, well, some of y'all claiming to be Christian, but don't have, I guess it would be like, y'all have faith without works. Clegg is saying, no. Look at the works of Malcolm, Brother Malcolm. Look at the works of Dr. King. Look at their fierce, unwavering, public commitment to the liberation of black people. And this is how you know who is and who is not Christian. Not by how well they dress. Not by how what they very money, what they very set up. When it comes to money, you can be a hero, people write the checks with holes and the zeros. That's not the standard. The standard for Clegg, the standard I would say for black theology, black liberationist theology, is not the recitation of the creeds. I'm not saying that the creeds are not valuable. I think they help shape and form some of our institutional, organizational, and congregational understandings. But if we start saying, what's the song say? You know, they will know that we are Christians by our bank account. That ain't what it says. That they will know that we are Christians by the number of times we come to. That ain't what it says. They will know that we are Christians by how long our robes are, or how thick our Bible is, or how well. It says they will know that we are Christians by our love. Now, love is an action verb.
Man, talk.
So, Clegg says, you know Malcolm is Christian by his love. It's not necessarily about the acclamation or claim of Islam. And I don't have time. I promise, Gino, if you bring me back, I would love to talk about the way some of these Abrahamic faith traditions overlap, the way that we can talk to fight against each other as a strategy of division that helps uphold and sustain white evangelical imperialism. But instead of drawing these sharp lines of demarcation between between the Nation of Islam and certain sectors of the Christian patriots. I tell you this, I don't know how to say this. So look, if I say this and this is wrong, y'all act like y'all didn't hear me say it. And then just know that Dr. Gibson didn't tell me to say it. But I'm going to take Louis Farrakhan and Malcolm X every day over Jerry Falwell and Pat Buchanan. Every day of the week. It reminds me when Dr. Jeremiah Wright says, they tried to get him to denounce Farrakhan, and he says, well, you don't tell me who my friends are. He was quoting Nelson Mandela, when Nelson Mandela was asked to denounce Fidel Castro. And he said, Mandela said, y'all don't tell me who my friends are, and y'all don't tell me who my enemies are. So, Farrakhan didn't put me in chains. You know, Farrakhan didn't make Farrakhan, that the Muslims didn't make us ride on the back of the bus. You know, they don't wear Klan robes. So, I think at some point, and I know our time is winding up, but we can do this for hours. At some point, I think we have to be, as Black Christians, a lot more enlightened, a lot more woke. We have to be a lot more sophisticated in our understanding of the different areas of the Black experience and the particular context by which we are existing and the rhetoric by which we've been asked to use and deploy, because oftentimes it dislodges us from our own scholars, elders, and ancestors. Any other questions?
You got a question? I'm listening, Sister Bird. Did you have your finger in your hand up?
Yeah, I don't know if y'all can see this chat. Gino is shouting in the chat. Talk, man. I can hear it. Now you can hear the voice. That's what it's just. Well, here's what I think I can say about where I see y'all as a congregation. And I'll wrap up with this. I see y'all as, because let's just be honest and clear. When you start talking about congregations that are committed to any semblance of Black liberation theology, then you are in the 1%. When they call Abyssinian the blackest church in Memphis and Shelby County, hear me when I say 4,000 churches in the city of Memphis, and I'm inclined to believe the majority of them are Black. So of the thousands of Black churches in the city of Memphis, nobody has ever contested us for the title. Which is to say, most Black churches are not even interested in trying to consider what Black theology or Black liberation theology is. So the mere fact that y'all are having some of these conversations, I think is great, and it signifies to the righteous and revolutionary work God is trying to do in that space. So I think from now, as you continue to explore some of the deeper meanings and some of the foundations of these ideologies and contextualize exactly where you are as a congregation, both from a geographical standpoint, like what does it mean to be this type of congregation in Columbus and in Ohio, so y'all are a blue dot in a red state, kind of like Memphis, and what does that mean for the broader Midwest? What does that mean for the broader network of Christian churches and Black faith communities across the country? As you start to contextualize that, I think it helps you map out what we would call it Abyssinian, the strategic plan over the next few years that confirm and sustain your relevance so that you can continue to maximize your ministerial impact. I believe that churches that are doing this work now are the churches that will maintain their relevance and their impact in the next 10, 15, 20 years. Because what we're seeing statistically is a great falling away. Say people are leaving churches in droves. They're just not interested in institutional churches the way they used to be. And they are coming from families and communities where this is becoming more and more of the cultural norm. But the churches that are proving themselves to be righteous and relevant and committed to revolutionary public witness are the churches that I think you see continue to flourish and grow. And so I think I'm on the right track. And I look forward to seeing what the next several months, years, decades of faithful and fruitful ministry are going forward. All right, Gina said one more, and then I got some electricians and roofers that I was sitting for some renovations we're doing that I got to meet with at the top of the hour. Ooh, that's a loaded question. Does black theology differ from Peter and Paul? Let me say it this way. I think black theology proper, it encompasses every aspect of God's plan for the liberation of God's people. So early on, when black theology became a field of study or an academic discipline, and be clear, Albert Clegg is the one who creates the term black liberation theology. James Cone got it from him. I talk about it in the book, in the chapter about Dr. King, Brother Malcolm, Dr. King, Black Power, and the relationship between Albert Clegg and James Cone. I do some of that. But at its offset in the 60s, it was criticized for being an academic discipline primarily, which is why I say, no, black theology proper, according to Albert Clegg, is a practical theology, not simply some highbrow academic theory. But it was also seen as male-centered. And so you had the development of womanist theology, which comes from black women who were saying, at least in part, that black theology was not speaking to the lived experiences of women. Now, I, as a black liberationist, say womanist theology is a part of black liberation theology proper. But I still affirm the distinctness of womanist theology. I say that to say, some of what Paul wrote, I think people will condemn and critique as giving too much credit and credence, or maybe even centering Roman cultural standards a little too much. And, whether you like it or not, there's two things that can be pointed to. A brother wrote about this, his name is Robert Eisman, in his book, James, the Brother of Jesus. Robert Eisman talks about how Paul's dual citizenship put him in a position of social and political privilege that the average Hebrew didn't have. And so Paul is trying to negotiate that level of what we would call today blackness in relationship to the empire. It's almost like what it means to have high social and political standing because of your religious affiliation or your political affiliation or your social or academic affiliation. And if you aren't careful, you will decenter the experiences of black folks who don't have the same portfolio or pedigree that you have. And you'll demonize blackness because whiteness is the standard that you no longer recognize as whiteness because you're so close in proximity to it. So people would say that Paul engages in some of that. Not only that, consider this. The way that the New Testament is written, we know it's not written in chronological order. The Gospel of Mark was written before the Gospel of Matthew. Yet you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So it's not in chronological order. And before all of those, I think the first Pauline epistle that was written would have been the book of Philippians, I think, or maybe Galatians, which would have been written somewhere around 70 AD, if I'm not mistaken. And when we get to the epistles, they don't start with Philippians or Galatians. So you got Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts. And out of all the epistles, the first one we start with is Romans. It seems a bit deferential to the empire. But if you know anything about the councils of bishops that got together and organized the structure of the scriptures the way we understand them today, then it might make more sense. But I think you find some black theology wherever you are looking for God to speak to the liberation of black people. So whether that's Paul, whether that's Peter, whether that's James, whether that's John, whether that's Revelation, whether that's Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, I think it is there, and I think most black liberationists would argue that too. And so I wouldn't want to split hairs about, black theology being different from Peter and Paul any more than I would want to split hairs about black theology being different from to Claire, to Dwight Hopkins, to J.D. Otis Roberts, to the women that's like Jacqueline Grant, or Katie Geneva Cannon, or Emily Towns, or Valerie Bridgman, or Renita Weems, or Barbara Holmes. I think it is the collective nature of our entire community as we are committed to God's will being done on earth as it is in heaven, especially in the lives of black folks. Because when we say there's nothing more sacred to God than the liberation of black people, we're not saying the only thing sacred to God is the liberation of black people. We are saying out of all of the things that are sacred to God, nothing is higher or more sacred than the liberation of black people. There might be other things equally as sacred, but nothing supersedes God's commitment to black liberation. So, I hope that has adequately answered the question. If not, what I pray y'all do, and I pray Dr. Gibson signs off on this. I can't wait to come. I haven't been to Mount Olive since Dr. Gibson was installed. And I can't wait to come back and have a deeper and more thorough exchange and interaction and conversation with all of you. But again, thank you to my big homie, Dr. Gibson. I salute you for your pastoral leadership and for your continued progression through the PhD program. I say this with no fear of contradiction. Eyes have not seen, ears have not heard, it has not even entered into the hearts of humanity the great things God has in store for you and the people of Mount Olive. Thank you, and I hope I have your permission to log off before these folks, the electrician and the roof, leave, and then I'll be in trouble with my board.
Bless you, man. I don't know if you can hear me, but bless you, man. Go ahead and take them off, Miles. Yes, I think we do, because when you, I respectfully disagree. But even you saying that has a lens that is probably tainted by white theology, and it's okay. Because, see, the difference between you, Mother Burke, when you went to Haiti, and a white person that went to Haiti, you didn't see them as less than. You didn't. But many of the white evangelicals did. And you know more than anybody, Haiti has been treated worse than any country in the Western Hemisphere. Why? Because it was the first country that beat white people. And as a result, they will never give it the money and the economic standing it deserves. Which then says to us that there are some people in power that have the wrong lens to this Bible that's based on their core belief that was formed by their social location. No, I don't believe it's the same sin, because our social location more matches Jesus than theirs. Remember, we talked about this in the beginning, and if you're still stuck on the spiritual Jesus, then what Dr. Fisher just did is not going to work, because Jesus was not only spiritual, Jesus was also existential. He grew up in Nazareth. He grew up in a place that was down, right? So when we're talking about people, the majority of this earth lives in what is called the global south. The global south is those places that are disenfranchised, the underfunded, and all of that stuff. The majority of this world. So when we go in as people who have been marginalized, we go in with a compassion, not a power structure, that's different than those who come from the power structure. Right? So it's not the same sin unless we're using our position as an American, as a male, or as a straight person to further marginalize the people. We're not doing that. So I don't think we're guilty of the same sin. And I'm not saying it's not all the world, but we can't leave our lens back home. Any other questions? Nobody said anything about that. Nobody said anything about that in this whole lecture. We just talking about the lens that we have to the Bible, to God, based on our social location. Somebody else. Yes.
To do. I know that, I guess I don't exactly, so even with the Haiti like mission trips and stuff like that, I don't know if necessarily the mission is just to push Jesus or also just to help people in need. But then if your neighbors, say at these white churches, are uneducated about what Jesus truly is, then what as a black congregation in the States or in Columbus you supposed to be doing today to, like, I guess educate or work on changing the standard?
I think first for us is education, right? It's education. We come in here and wrestle with this stuff. And one of the things I think that was brilliant that Earl said, that not only is it social cultural, but it's chronological, right? There's certain generations that are not going to listen to this.
Right.
And the reason they're not going to listen to this is because all of their life they've been taught one way and they will go that way. Does it mean this is less true? No. But it does mean, like when I say let's do Come As You Are. There's certain people in this church I know will never wear jeans to church. They ain't doing it. It's Come As You Are all summer. They're not going to do it. Why? Because for them, you put on your Sunday's best, right? So when you're talking about this, we have to, number one, deal with education for us. We just mocked us, spent 23 weeks dealing with this stuff. And we got one of the top budding scholars in America that gave us an hour of his time. Well, we're going to give him a check too, but gave us an hour of his time to break down this stuff in a deep way. So I think we start there. Then we make it become